thank you so much for all of you. This is a lot of people.
Wonderful.
Thank you to our authors. I've had so much fun telling people, oh, I'm reading a book called, The Black Girl Survives in this one. And I'm reading another book, like, what's that called? Oh, The White Guy Dies. But just to be clear, they're not in conversation with each other. This is a happy coincidence, right?
Happy coincidence.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to be, I'm curious, what was your introduction to horror? Because I know for me, when I was a kid, I was a big Christopher Pike fan. I wasn't an R.L. Stine fan, I'm so sorry. Whoa. But what was your introduction to horror growing up?
Are we going down the line?
Please do, yes.
Well, my introduction was my two brothers. They were tasked with babysitting me while I was younger, and so they decided to torture me with horror films. The joke was on them because I said I'm going to face my fear, and while I was scared crapless, I ended up falling in love with the genre.
Yeah.
So for me, I came to horror through movies and television first. And I'm sorry, but I grew up reading R.L. Stine.
It's okay.
His books are like totally the type of stories that I write. Like, give me horror, give me comedy. Like, it's perfect. But I have to say, I think I didn't read, as much of it as a middle grade reader. When I got older, I think it was like Anne Rice, vampires, Christopher Pike, like you mentioned, R.L. Stine. Of course, I feel like everyone has read Stephen King. So all of these names, right? But I didn't discover Black writers in this genre until much, much later on. So that was sort of my introduction. I am obsessed with TV, movies. I actually talked to some teens earlier, and they were like, what's like the worst thing you have watched? And I said, well, I hate watch a lot of stuff. So, I mean, blame it on my brothers. After you torture me, I'm just like, I will watch anything and like get through it. So I was like, I kind of like it all. The campy, the really spooky stuff, except for ghost stories. Like anything that's possession, I don't watch, but I do read. We can talk about that. Yeah, I don't want to hog up the stage, but I'm interested in what they'll say.
Yeah, for me, my mom is responsible.
Oh.
She's the person that got me into horror. I talk about this a bit in the editor's note for The White Guy Dies First, but I have very, very fond memories of watching horror movies with my mom way past our bedtimes. Like, and I'm about to date myself a minute here. Like, do you remember back in the day when HBO would play horror movies after midnight?
Yes.
Yeah. So I would get in bed with my mom and we would watch all kind of stuff that I was not supposed to be watching. And it would, like you, it would scare the crap out of me, but I could not quit horror. And it just grew up in me. And I also grew up on R.L. Stine. I read Goosebumps, I like Goosebumps, but I needed Fear Street.
Fear Street,
I needed the rush because I had already been broken in, so I needed the experience of Fear Street.
I mean, horror after dark, midnight, like you were watching some scary stuff.
Yes, like Night of the Living Dead, Child's Play, like A Nightmare on Elm Street, all of that stuff. I don't know what was wrong with me.
Absolutely. Similar to all of them, I kind of came into horror in two ways. TV, like, Tales from the Crypt, that kind of HBO. Are You Afraid of the Dark? With Nickelodeon back in the 90s. But I was a 90s reader, so I was an R.L. Stine. I had like 50 of the Fear Street. I was a collector. So R.L. Stine is actually responsible for my first library, building my first library. So I had all the R.L. Stine books, the Christopher Pike, Carolyn B. Cooney, that whole 90s era of paperback horror. That was my entryway into horror, really. And then, you moved on to Anne Rice, the kind of elders of horror. But it was really those early paperback, affordable from like the Scholastic book fairs that allowed me to really create a library. And I fell in love with those books. And, I kind of, in many ways, this was kind of my way of kind of honoring that which made me someone who loved writing.
Yeah, so when you have The Black Girl Survives in this one, when you have The White Guy Dies First, what is the spiel that the writers are given to contribute?
Oh man. I have to really give it up to Desiree here because my assignment was do whatever you want. The black girl just needs to survive at the end. and put them through the ringer. Like those were my two things. And then Desiree was like, oh, here's like this wonderful list of like all the subgenres in horror that you can also think about. And I was like, yeah, and that too. So I'll let her talk about it because I think a lot of people, when they think of horror, they only think of like, ah, it has to be very scary, but there's so many different types of subgenres.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to talk about
Yeah,
that one pager.
I just wanted folks to know, like, there was this, horror is huge, it's expansive, it's psychological, it's monsters, creature features, it's ghosts, it's possession, there's, the idea of human horror, right? And so, and this really came from me teaching speculative fiction at the university level. So I wanted to kind of give like a mini course in what horror can do and what horror can be. And people really responded to having those options about what they can really write about and how expansive it is. It doesn't just have to be a slasher, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, and what was interesting is some of the feedback was, oh, I didn't know this subgenre was considered horror. And we were like, interesting. Well, it is, according to this one, this one pager.
Wait, what's an example of that, though?
I think we had a few fantasy writers who were like, oh, I don't know if I can, really go
What's
there and do it.
Yeah, tag, how does it?
And then when they were looking at the subgenres, they're like, oh, I always considered this fantasy instead of horror. I don't remember exactly which subgenre it was within the horror scape, but I just find that that's very interesting. And I think for a very long time, before horror even had like its own place on the shelf, it was categorized as fantasy. So a lot of people, they're like, oh, and then dark fantasy became a thing. How many dark fantasy readers out there, right? Yes, exactly. I love dark fantasy. And so, we could go into this later, but that was sort of what we looked at for our contributor list is, well, this person already wrote a dark fantasy. They're like borderline horror. They just need to go this way. So it was kind of like a nice conversation with some of these people to say like, hey, you are already doing this, or you might have one expectation of what horror is, but it's actually more than just that. And I think that happens with a lot of different genres, especially now. So people are like, oh, you could write romance and horror, or you could do romance and fantasy, and we all know romantasy is really big right now. So I'm like, yes, you can have a horror comedy, you can have a psychological horror, which also gets classified as thrillers sometimes. They're like, oh, it's a mystery thriller. It's like, actually, this is more horror, but okay. So who knows? I don't label stuff. But that one pager, I was like, oh, this is dope, because now it's like you don't need permission, right?
Yeah.
You no longer, I can't write it. No more excuses.
Yeah.
The door is open.
Yeah,
Plenty of things that can be done.
That's how you end a Zoom call. Like,
Right. I was like, we're going to get these writers. They're going to say yes, right, Desiree? And most of them did. They were like,
Absolutely.
I didn't think I could do it, but now this subgenre I feel like I could have some fun with. And that was really cool to see.
Terry.
Yeah, so I talked to all of the contributors up front, and I told them, I warned them up front. I said, working with me is going to be very intense because I am very serious about storytelling. I'm a very thematic storyteller. Every single thing that I write has a central theme, which is one of the things that I love about horror too, right? Horror allows us to look at some of the uglier parts of society and our world and our communities. And I told all of the contributors that I wanted them to write a story that was very personal to them.
Nice.
And just build a concept and a theme that meant something. And I would work with them on finding the beating heart of every story and helping it stand out and beat stronger. And I told them, I want this to be an elevated horror experience. And every single person really showed up and showed out with these stories. And starting out, like you all, I created a list of 20 classic subgenres of horror. And I sent the list to everyone, and they were told to pick one subgenre and subvert it in a new and exciting way. And of course, a cis-het white guy has to always die first.
I love it, I love it, I love it.
I will also add the caveat, we don't always survive, but we don't die first.
Oh gosh, okay. Because you've answered this a bit.
Yeah.
Like, was there like guidelines or besides like the title mandate? But you answered that a little bit. One thing I am curious about, because we did on Code Switch did an episode where I was trying to figure out if there's a lot of horror films recently, if it involves people of color, it usually involves some kind of racial trauma. And it seems that like within the stories that I read, that's not an issue in these books. Was that a calculated move on your part, or it's just like happenstance? It's just like, no, these are the stories that we write that don't, like, racial trauma just isn't a part of it.
Yeah.
I think.
No, please go first.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think for me, we chose to not write stories that centered racial trauma, but when you're writing from a very authentic place, when you're writing characters of color, especially in a contemporary setting, we have to be cognizant of how race and systemic oppression and things play into that. And so it's, as a person of color, you'll be able to read it and relate to the characters and what they're going through, but the racial trauma is not the center of the story, if that makes sense.
100%.
Yeah.
I think in the Black Girl Survives in this one, we didn't necessarily tell any of the contributors, like, don't go there. I think a lot of them, like I said, just wanted that freedom to play in their stories. And then there are some writers who always tackle those themes in their work, like Justina Ireland's. You know, I love her story, and there's some, you know, racial trauma in there, but it's not the point of the story. And so it's really well done. And so if you are like a deeper reader, you might pick up on that, but it's not a major theme.
Yeah.
So it kind of just reads like this really cool, interesting story. I don't want to give too much away for people who haven't read it, but
Great.
Justina Ireland is one of my favorite writers who has been writing, you know, horror and dark stories for young people for a very long time. So when she signed on and
I was
said
so
yes, I
excited.
was like,
And in many ways, her story really subverts I'm not going to say what it is, but really subverts this trope in a really interesting way. And so that's really exciting as well. But yeah, there's some writers who kind of, I mean, my story kind of touches on on trauma. There's definitely Charlotte's story, Justina's story. You know, there are elements to like just the Black experience that are just part of our makeup, but it doesn't have to be the only element, right? It could be about the cute guy you're thinking about. It could be about, you know, there's all these things that are happening in your life that your experience of your race is just it's a part of that, right? It's intricate to that. It's intricate to your history and to who you are as a survivor, right? And so it's there, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the lead, right? And so I think that's something we're really talking about when we think about marketing and like the horror boom right now, and just kind of, you know, Jordan Peele did amazing work with helping us usher into this moment. And because that was the first popular quote in Black horror in recent years, that became something that a lot of, you know, Hollywood modeled after. But it's not the only way to tell horror stories, right? And so that's really exciting to think about, like, what other ways can we be in the genre and express our pain and our trauma through these different other elements, like comedy and, you know, these other elements of talking about how we experience the world, right?
I mean, what I loved was that there's these like really great nuances to the stories. I mean, your story that does involve like generational trauma through demon possession, love it. And then, I mean, even I think there was in one of the stories that's in the white guy dies in this one is dies first is I think it was like one of the nuanced things was like, oh, this one kid. He seemed leery of the other kid because his cornrows weren't braided all the way down. And I was like, oh, that's such a specific experience as a kid. Like, oh, that's real. I understand. But when this is a glib question. When you're talking to a publisher about wanting to make stories with, you know, slightly incendiary titles, and and what the goal of like the mission of those stories is, does a publisher go, yeah, let's do that? Or is there some cajoling and there's some like, the kids need it?
I mean, the kids do need it, but that wasn't really in our pitch that we put together. I think we sold our anthology on a proposal. I don't know if any of you know what a proposal is, but you kind of like include like a summary of what the piece is supposed to be about, you know, listing the contributors and kind of like a mission statement of what, you know, you hope to accomplish with it. And we included a letter as well. But I had published with Flatiron previously, and I have to say, you know, they were really interested in acquiring diverse stories. So I feel like for us, and Desiree, please speak on this, but it wasn't an uphill battle when we pitched it. It wasn't kind of like, okay, we have to explain to you why this very Black book should be published today. They heard the pitch and they were blown away and they were like, horror? Final Girls, right? Like, of course, Black Final Girls, but like, it was like, oh yeah, we want this. Like, people are gonna eat this up. It wasn't a conversation of like, oh, well, we don't know how to market this, or we don't know if this is gonna sell. You know, I don't remember any conversation.
Yeah, they were really excited about it. They're like, this is original. And it's also just the moment, you know, I think it's funny because we all came to our agent, we all shared their agent at the time, saying we wanted to do Black horror anthologies. You know, it was a moment where horror was booming and we wanted to see more of what it means to be diverse within that field, right? And so I think they understood that as publishers as well and said, hey, you're contributing something that we don't see right now in the genre, and that's a conversation starter. So I think in a lot of ways, they wanted to be a part of that kind of momentous decision as well.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with my editorial team at Tortine, who publishes The White Guy Dies First, as well as my Blood Debt series. And I have a great working relationship with them. Tor has been absolutely incredible with supporting me in my career and everything that I want to write. And if anything, they're like, can you take this further? Like, more? For the longest, too, after I finished Blood Justice, I was so terrified once it went to copy edits that they were going to send it back and be like, what is this? You cannot publish this. But no, they didn't. They did stop me, though. I wanted the tagline to be sometimes violence is the answer. And they were like, no.
But that would get me to go get the book.
Right? But it's, I mean, I understand. I was like, you gave me enough. I cashed out while I was ahead.
Good. But when you're making these, when you have carte blanche like that to like build a story, like when you're to build these anthologies, what did you feel was missing? What did you think, oh, I haven't seen this before, let's do this? Like what, especially in like the people of color horror space, what did you feel you could contribute to what was missing?
Well, I think for Desiree and I, it was the Black Final Girl trope. And that's really tied to slashers, but we decided, hey, we've got this one opportunity. There's no wood up here, but knock on wood that we get more opportunities. But we said, if we're gonna do Black Final Girls, let's just kick it open and make it every type of horror story, because this could be the only collection that exists. And so I think even some of the reviewers have like read it and been like, oh, I thought all the stories were gonna be a slasher. And I'm like, all right, you're a true horror fan, so I do apologize. But this is us getting our foot in the door. And so, like you said, what is missing? This is what's missing, Black girls in horror, and just more people of color in general. But that was our assignment, and we were like, all right, we got it.
Yep.
Let's just go on. So if you're a real horror fan that loves slashers, I apologize, but understand what our mission was and what we wanted to do for other Black girls who want to see themselves in these stories. And also, because there's so many writers who write about Black girls and trauma, and not a lot of them survive at the end, right? Some of them go missing in these stories, some of them are never found. And so I think even the title, right? For Black women, they're like, oh, it says the Black girl survives in this one, so at least I know it may not be a happy ending, but whatever this girl is about to go through, she gonna survive at the end, right? And I think all of us as humans have gone through things and probably thought at some point, I'm never gonna survive this. And then you make it through at the end. And so especially for those Black girls out there, you have so much on you. To see a title like that alone, I would buy it. I wouldn't even care what the genre is. I'm like, this is just a book I need that I will read and hopefully find some inspiration from. But I think that was really our goal. But Desiree, please let me know if I'm missing anything else, because I think we tried to accomplish a lot with that anthology.
I mean, I just remembered, this is when you consume a genre and you love it so much and you just want to see yourself in it, right? I remember just watching The Walking Dead, and like, the Black folks were always dying first, and it's like, for one, you're in Atlanta, the setting. I'm like a Black city, and somehow we didn't exist in that setting, and we didn't survive somehow. It's just the logics of all of that, right?
Desiree, I hate to break it to you.
It just is, it's fascinating to think about, this. So just for me, it's just like, okay, well, zombies, aliens, whatever the subgenre is, we're gonna come out. You know, our journey is there, and we're gonna survive it. And it's just for me, as a Black woman in America, you know, I worked in public health for a long time, and I know the stats. I'm in my community. I know what Black girls are facing, what Black women are facing. I know we die in our 40s and 50s. I know like just things of like what we go through to survive. And so for me, using the genre as a way to talk about like, we go through a lot, but guess what? We're gonna make it. You know, for me, that was what I needed at the time. And I hope in a lot of ways when the 11-year-old, 12-year-old picks this up and she knows like, hey, I'm going through some stuff at school, you know, but guess what? This is a story in here that I really relate to, and I'm coming through it, you know? That's what I wanted. I just wanted someone to see themselves come through something.
Yeah, I love that, and I love that you both did that with your anthology because Black girls need to see themselves represented in that way. And horror is very cathartic, right?
Absolutely.
Because the monsters and the supernatural forces in horror stories often represent some of the nastier, uglier parts of our world.
Yeah.
And it's nice to be able to see characters going up against that larger than life evil. And sometimes they triumph, sometimes they don't. But it's nice to see because you know, we don't often get to face that larger than life evil head on in the real world.
Yes.
And that is why it's so important for us to have anthologies like The White Guy Dies First and like The Black Girl Survives in this one. So kids of color can see themselves represented in these stories going up against these larger than life forces. So they can feel empowered when they get back to the real world and they have to face that stuff in real life. So that's what I saw that was missing in the genre.
Jeez Louise.
I love that.
I mean, I think there's this irony of, for a long time, in like the horror trope was that the person of color, the minority, died first in like a slasher film. When, I mean, historically, like the marginalized person in the world makes it, like, you know, they sense a danger and they get the heck out of Dodge. I mean, if you want to watch Scream 2, that's a great explanation. Also, The Skeleton Key I just watched recently. Where
That is amazing.
Let's talk about
Yes.
Skeleton Key, watch it.
not to like spoil, but there's a great moment where they explain why they can never possess Black people.
Yes.
And they were like, you know, the Black ones never stay. And that,
I love that.
and that has stuck with me
Yeah.
still into my adulthood. Like, you know what? You're right. The house is spooky. You get out. Except for, we can turn to Terry's story.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk individually. I mean, we're gonna spoil a little bit because I love all of your stories so much. Specifically the three that you did for your anthologies. If we want to go, we can talk about Terry's first, The Road to Hell, which I
That's a title, right?
The Road, great title. It is also, it's a haunted house from the POV of the haunted house,
Yes.
which I had never read before, I guess, or I'm just not, I haven't found that before, of just like, you know, a house obsessed with a teenage boy, and like, be grateful be grateful that I love you. Where'd that come from, Terry? Why?
Keep in mind, he said make it very personal, so, you know, this is going to be a good answer.
Yeah,
And
it
it's the last story in the anthology, and it gets you. Tell the people, Terry.
Of course, I got you. The inspiration for that came from The Haunting of Hill House, the television show. Now, I watched the television show. It's utter nightmare fuel. I don't scare easily. It scared me. And so after that, I was like, I want to read the book. And I read the book, and I was underwhelmed. No shade to Shirley Jackson.
We love Shirley Jackson.
Yeah, it's beautifully written. But what I loved about the book was the characterization of the house. Hill House almost became its own character. And so I was like, what if I took that even further and made the haunted house the character? And that's why I came up with the idea for The Road to Hell. And it's about this haunted house that was built in the 1600s in the Florida Everglades in a haunted swamp. And it was just introduced to a life of violence and depravity. And it tries to be good, it tries its best, but it sometimes fails. And it collects ghosts from people who perish in the swamp. And it collects them as its friends, because for the longest time, ghosts were the only people or beings that would love it.
Yes.
Then one summer, a 16-year-old boy named Danger and his two dads move in to rehab the property. And the house immediately becomes enamored with them. And it tries to pull out all the stops to impress them so they will make it their forever home. But things kind of go off the rails, and the family is introduced to a night of unbridled terror that will teach the house why the road to hell is paved with good intent. Now, I will say the story has a deeper message as well. So it's in second person, and it's told from the POV of the house. It's narrating to the 16-year-old boy. But at its core, this story is an allegory for domestic abuse survivors and how sometimes our trauma manifests in our pursuit of love.
Gotcha.
Oh boy.
Very deep.
Oh, okay. So Desiree, we have the Brides of Devil's Bayou. Because I love the foreword for the book. I think it's written by Tanner Reeve.
Yes, it is.
And so, who we love, give up to Tanner Reeve. And so reading your story, which again is like you're ending generational trauma through actual demon possession. I was just like, it felt like a great Tanner Reeve do kind of homage. But where were you going with the story when you formulated it?
Well, you know, it's funny because I went through many stories before I reached this one, because we were both, you know, as editors, kind of waiting for like, is there anything that we want to write that hasn't already been written? But I knew I wanted to do a possession story, but I didn't want to do kind of a typical, you know, like, you know, the Exorcist kind of stories that we've seen and know, and Conjuring, you know, those kind of stories. But I wanted to be about stories, and the stories we tell in our family. I love folklore. I love I'm from Louisiana. We tell a lot of stories. We have a lot of which seems to folks as like magical histories, but just like this is how we do things. This is how we sweep out the demons. This is how we, you know, what we got to put the salt. You know, just the ways of being that are just a part of like how we think about spirits being a part of the world or the textures of our world. So I really wanted to kind of capture that piece of it in the story as well. And to think about stories, to think about family folklore, to think about history, but also to think about like what we carry from the past that kind of shows up in the present. So it was very much like I'm going to tackle generational trauma, but I'm going to use it through the metaphor of demon, right? Of the demon. And how do you fight back? How do you look at the past? How do you, you know, address the past, but also how do you like in this moment kind of reclaim your own story, your narrative, but also for the ancestors, for the people, for the ones who didn't survive, you know? And so that's kind of, I want to put all those elements together in a gumbo and, you know, create this piece about coming through it all. And I have been suffering for many years of insomnia, and so it was like my way of also dealing with like, this idea of dreams and like of why can't you sleep? What is the core of that? What is that core of that trauma that you're trying to really dig out, right? And so that kind of came through the story as well. And so I just wanted to like really think about healing through a you know, kind of a trope of a Black survivor girl story.
All right. Now, Ceresia did Cemetery Dance Party. That's her story.
Yes.
Which is, I love, it's like, you know, possessed house, possessed generations, Cemetery Dance Party. It's so fun. It's like a silent party in a cemetery, which I think silent parties with like the headphones on are scary to begin with.
Yeah.
I mean, no one's ever really on beat, and no one is like, everyone's listening to two different channels. It is, I mean,
Weird.
if you love it, I like it. But please tell about your story.
Yes, so it's a beautiful collection, but I feel like no one really brought in the comedy part of it. And so I grew up absolutely loving Scary Movie, Scary Movie 2, like had it on VHS, watched it every night, had siblings who were like, Ceresia, please no. And I was like, you mean Ceresia, please yes. Like, I'm doing you a favor. And so I wanted something like that, right? Like the spooky, but also like some satire in there. And it has a little bit of everything that I loved growing up. So it was kind of like my little like kiss to the genre. Michael Jackson fans? Thriller? All right, so that was like the main character. She's like, okay, I want to do like something spooky, theme for this party. How many of you, when you were younger, have been to parties that have been shut down and you're like, man, if so-and-so didn't do this, if this fight didn't break out, or if this person didn't find out we had alcohol here, or whatever the thing is, it wouldn't have got shut down? Let's eliminate that, right? So the main character, Allie, is like, we'll do a silent dance party at a cemetery. Who's gonna come shut down a party at a cemetery? Nobody. But what could go wrong at a cemetery, right? And so you have a bunch of teenagers having fun, like you said, dancing, and then of course something goes wrong. A fight breaks out. You got a girl crushing on a boy, an argument, and I'm like, this is so fun. Like it was really fun for me to write. But also, like I said, huge R.L. Stine fan. And so he has done a lot of readings, if you've ever attended any in New York City, in a famous cemetery called the Woodlawn Cemetery. So the Woodlawn Cemetery ends up in this short story, and it was kind of like, okay, Mr. R.L. Stine, you do readings here. We're gonna do parties and then have like really bad things happen. So it was kind of all of those things I grew up on, and then I was like, I want to make it fun, right? And not focus too much on the undead, but the undead do appear. And it was just so fun to write that. And it made me laugh. And it's very like on the nose for people who are like, oh, I don't want to search too hard for these, these gems or these nuggets. I'm like, this is horror light for you. Like this is like, if you're like, I need horror intro 101, something that's not like gonna really freak me out, start with my story and then find the courage to go through the other stories in the book. Like Desiree's is it's very spooky. So, you can have your little barometer of like, I'm here and then I'll work my way up.
Yep.
There you go. All right, so I know that there are a lot of like young writers out there. So last year here I interviewed Shanna Reeve-Dew and Grady Hendrix.
Yes.
Both fun. But one thing that really stuck with me about the way that they write is they said that like a good scare is the same as writing a good joke with a punchline. And I'm curious, just like it's a little tip for the young writers out there, what makes a good horror short story? Like, how were you able to like be like, oh, this is done, this is good?
That's tough.
That's a
I'm like,
Y'all are also the editors.
Okay. I'll jump in because I think during the editorial process, for me, what makes a good short story is feeling like it's had like a novel style ending. And so I think I want to talk about Fox Hunt by Charlotte Nicole Davis. They ended the story one way with their first 2 drafts. And I was like, I love it, this is amazing. And then during copy edits, they were like, I want to change the ending. And so there's this alternate ending that is equally satisfying, and that's the one that ended up in the book. But I tell Desiree all the time, I'm like, that other ending, whoo, just hits me right here. And at the end of the day, it's like writer's choice, right? Like you control the world. And so I think during the editorial process, it was so collaborative. And obviously Desiree and we edited first, and then we had our editors at Flatiron like comment in and say some stuff too. But that was the one story where I was like, I still feel like the story isn't satisfied. Like completely to me as a reader, because I now know what the other alternate ending is, but again, both equally satisfying. So I think when I think about short stories, you start off really good and you have to have a really good beginning to capture the reader, but then the ending has to equally feel satisfying. And some people write short stories where they're like, I may want to come back to this and like maybe make it a novella or make it a novel, so they'll leave an entryway, right? Kind of ending. But I feel like with Fox Hunt, I think Charlotte Nicole Davis had a very clear like view and message for what they wanted to do with this piece of work. And it's such a powerful story. And maybe one day I can talk them into releasing that alternate ending and like see what the fans say. But I think that's the beauty of writing, is making sure I can grab your attention and then making sure by the end you feel fulfilled in some kind of way, right? I think most of the stories in the collection leave you walking away like, that felt good. Like, I understand the arc. And then there are some that you're like, but what just happened?
What did I go through?
And you're like, I think I need this to be a novel, like Desiree's story. It's like, yes, I like that, but also, is he really over? You know? So for me, that's what it is. I would love to hear for y'all.
For me, before we start every story, I make sure I understand what the contributor's purpose is for that story. I say, what's your goal with telling the story? Why are you telling it? And of course, I make sure that the story has a beginning, middle, and an end, and we have engaging characters. But I don't let them stop until I feel like you've done what you set out to do and we're satisfied with it. So once you meet your purpose, then we can call it done.
Yep.
All right. You're right. You are a stressful.
Yeah, I am. And I do not let up.
Desiree. Oh,
Not much to add, but yeah, we just kind of went into it. I mean, short story writing is actually very hard. I would actually tell people to tackle that before even trying to do a novel. You learn a lot of skills about just space, efficiency. That's really pacing, particularly the horror story, right? And so it's really a good skills building element. And and you only have so much time to tell a story, right? And so that's one thing we had a lot of novelists. And some of them were first-time short story writers, as part of our collection. And so a lot of it was kind of a back and forth, being like, okay, this is not a novel. So we have to really rethink how we tell this story in 5,000 words or less, right? And so to still have that payoff at the end, to still have your question, the goal responded to and the question answered, right? And so you bring them in, make her go through some stuff, because this is a survivor story. Sometimes that needed to be upped, because we were very much, a lot of our comments were like, add some more scares. Make her suffer a little bit more before we get to that, because that cathartic payoff is even stronger when she has that journey, and when you as a reader can go through that journey with the character. And so a lot of those comments were towards that, and also kind of, again, at the end, do you feel like you've come through and responded to the first kind of initiating questions you had? So.
Yeah. And one other thing I will say is short stories are meant to like get going. You hit the ground running.
Yeah.
You're not like building. You do have to build to the suspense, but it's such a wonderful learning experiment for later when you do your chapter writings if you're working on a novel, right? It's like each chapter feels satisfying. There's not that much like exposition or whatever, And so it was a lot of like, we're gonna trim this because that's nice. That's a lovely backstory, but we don't really need to know that, right? Like put a one-liner that sums it up and keep going. And then other parts where if it's a major theme in the short story, then it's like, okay, you can give this a few sentences, and so it's balancing all of that. Yeah. I think N.K. Jessamine, started writing short stories, and she has always mentioned in a lot of her interviews that like, if you can master the art of short storytelling, you can master the art of writing a novel, basically, because it really is chapter-based, right? When you think about it, like your chapter should be 5,000, and the scene that needs to be set in that one chapter needs to happen. And then, unless you're doing a cliffhanger or something, then that part changes at the end, but you have to get it all through, and then you move on to the next chapter. What happens next, right?
Yep.
one thing, okay, it's clear that I did not fully appreciate young adult fiction when I was a young adult. What these anthologies are, are geared towards young adults.
Yes.
How do you tap into what the fears are of young people right now to create these stories?
I think a lot of young people, especially right now, are just trying to rationalize a lot of what's going on in the world and how they fit in and what their role is, and also why adults do the very, very silly things that we do that don't make sense. When I'm writing for teens, I'm always thinking about what it was like when I was a teen and how frustrated I was because I felt like adults didn't really listen to me. They didn't really value my opinions. And it's funny because like I talk to adults nowadays and they talk about kids and I'm like, how do you not remember what it was like when you were a kid? Because I'm 40 and I still remember, I'm 40 and I still remember what it was like when I was a kid and how frustrating that was. So whenever I'm writing for kids, I'm trying to think about that and like how they might feel in just like the present setting of the world and everything that's going on and everything that they're having to deal with.
Yeah. I do a lot of workshops with youth, and what Terry said is a lot of them feel unheard, but also gaslit by adults. They feel like they're not listening to me. They tell me all these things, but I am smart enough to understand that what you're telling me doesn't really make a lot of sense. So they're coming, a lot of these kids are coming through, coming through a lot of global stuff, that's happening, and they're like, what's going on? Why aren't the adults doing anything? And why is no one even hearing me when I'm upset or when I'm going through my issues, And so I felt like that, to me, YA speaks to that in such a beautiful way. Which is why I love writing it. I love reading it still till this day because it is about that young folk finding their voice, finding their power, stepping into their power, and realizing like that disillusionment in adults is called for a lot of times. It's just not about rebelling. It's about actually understanding that I have a voice too in this world, and my experience of the world is legit, right? And in trying to like navigate that story through that lens. And so a lot of ways, I think horror is a great genre to think about that because it's like, again, you already feel like so much of the world feels almost surreal. Even like when we think about like outside of the supernatural element of horror, like so much of the experience for a lot of youth feels as huge as some sort of like, supernatural creature that you're up against in many ways. And so it's just, okay, let's make that real. Let's make that creature real. And how do we take it on? How do we battle it? And how can a reader, a youth who's reading this, see themselves battling whatever their kind of creature is in the real world through the lens of our stories, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also for me, in addition to everything that they said, I am a young presenting face. Yes, thank you. But also, I still have the same struggles that a lot of these teens are dealing with. I walk into a room and people think I am 17 years old. I'm 18 years old, and so I think about the ageism, right? Where a lot of young people are like, oh, I was told I couldn't do this because I'm 16 or I'm 17, but actually, I've been through some stuff and I can do this. I am capable. Or it's, being a Black woman in a corporate space and trying to, vocalize certain topics or things and trying to get people to change their way of seeing the world. And they're like, who are you? You're just this woman who knows nothing. And so I'm still experiencing a lot of what these young people are experiencing. And I think that's why so many adults actually read YA. Absolutely. Because we are still, spoiler alert, you may have a birthday every year and your age, the number may go up, but you're still dealing with the same things. And I think for me, it's always easy to tap into that. When I was in graduate school, one of my mentors said, you nailed the 15-year-old voice. You nailed that experience. And I said, I think that was a pivotal moment for me in high school. So I vividly remember sophomore year, right? I had survived freshman year, and sophomore year I was trying to do all of these things and people kept telling me no, you don't have the skill set, or we don't think you're there yet, or you don't have the range. And it was a frustrating year for me. And so I can easily tap into those feelings because they never really go away, believe it or not. I still have elders in my life who tell me, "Sweet, what do you think you're doing? Blah, 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 blah." You know, my mom still tells me, "Why are you wearing your hair that way?" Or "Why are you writing, why did you do this in the story? Why didn't you do that?" And I'm like, it never ends, does it? Right? And so those feelings, they're still there. So I easily tap into them. And the only difference is now I'm like, how are the young people tackling these issues?
Yeah.
How are they doing it differently? And so I observe and I pay attention to that. And then, of course, I have a lot of cousins and nieces and nephews and stuff like that. So I love engaging with them and speaking to them because I'm like, when I was your age, I was actually never at this point that you are now.
Yeah.
And I incorporate those new ways of like tackling the same things that we're dealing with.
And I think a lot about disillusionment too. That I mean, I'm thinking about a group I was working with recently, and you know, a lot of them, the feeling of being outside of something, you know, this feeling of disillusionment, but also particularly as Black kids and kids of color, who we write about, who we write to in a lot of ways, and to be folks who are invisibilized in so many spaces, but also hyper-visibilized for like the, you know, the things that, you know, you should be worried about or talked about in certain ways. And so you're navigating these stereotypes and these tropes, you know, in the real world, right? And so who are you when you have television, you have media and society saying one thing about you, and you know who you are, right? And you know that in so many spaces, you don't know who you're allowed to be in those spaces. So that confusing, that moment of just like figuring out who the heck you are in the world, I love that about YA as a place to really kind of negotiate that. And again, as adults, we still deal with that, but like kids are just like, who am I? Who am I supposed to be when all the world is telling me all these different things?
All right. I want to take time for a couple of questions, if you have them. I don't know how this part works. There are mics. Hi.
Hi.
Oh, hopefully you can hear me. If not, I don't mind doing this. BA, I'm absolutely in love with you. Thank you for your work in Code Switch. I think you're absolutely amazing. I think this is also a question hopefully everyone can answer. For folks who are writing and want to make a career out of writing, how do you keep that stamina? Because yes, writing young adult and I guess adult, I don't know, I'm kind of in there too. But like there are moments where I'm in a funk and I can't get myself out. So like, how do you get yourself out? What keeps you inspired? What keeps you going as you make your life writing about these very big things and also probably really small things, but that matter in the genres that you're working in?
I think for me, I always try to remember the joy in writing and storytelling. I'm always coming up with a story. I get in trouble all the time, like when I was working in corporate and we would have training classes, I'd be drawing like little comics and like passing them to my seat partner. But I have so much fun telling stories, and when you start to get into the mindset of like doing it to get published, you can easily lose the joy of that. And so when that happens to me, I have to take a break and refuel my joy meter. And I do that by reading other stuff. And I have a lot of author friends, and I will talk to them about their work, and we'll talk about my work. And then that typically gets me excited to go back to my project.
For me, it's reading. When I read something, I can't help but want to do something. You know, like I want to respond back with my own story. You know, in so many ways. So just the love of reading, which I've had since I learned how to read, and so that's a reminder to me every day. I think all of us are kind of coming to our publishing careers later in life after having had other careers. Like I had 2 or 3 other careers before this, but I had always loved writing, and I couldn't give it up. And so one day I said, you know what, I'm gonna try. And so, you know, years and years now, particularly at a time where I feel like we're finally having so much more space for Black authors to kind of take our stage, to tell our stories in the genres we love, that inspires me to keep it, because I wanna be a part of this moment, and I wanna make sure it lasts.
The only thing I would add is I don't believe in writer's block. I think that what it is I'm not inspired. And so sometimes if I don't have time to read a book, if I'm writing a romance scene, I'm throwing on the Hallmark Channel and I'm binging all day, and then I'm in that mood to write that. If I just need something where it's like maybe not tied to a specific genre or scene. I'll go to like looking at pictures, go to a museum if I can, and just literally stare at the piece of art and get into that creative feeling. So I don't really believe in, oh, I'm having writer's block. I'm like, you're uninspired.
Yeah.
Right? And so in addition to reading whatever, sometimes, again, you can't always read audiobooks, but all other forms of media also help me.
I do that too, but with Beyonce videos.
See? Right, I need some artistic
storytelling
inspiration.
helps. Yep.
Beyonce, she's got everything.
The whole package.
I love it.
Fancy blouse.
I think we're all inspired by Beyonce. I'm still giggling. Thank you all for your comments and for your storytelling. I'm so curious about how you approach your writing across different genres, how you approach horror and the tropes and how you're exploring, society's ills versus how you approach that in fantasy and what are the similarities and the contrasts when you're thinking and approaching these stories.
I love that. That's a great question. You want to take that on?
Go first,
As
Sarah.
let's see.
I mean, you're the only one that's like published both. We're writing both, but you
Yeah, so for me, I love both fantasy and horror, and actually, like at their core, I always start with a concept and a theme, and I don't always know what genre it's going to be in, and as I'm working on it, it changes and develops too. So, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but yes, so fantasy, of course, is like I build a theme around like magic and a magic system, and then horror, a lot of just like really off the wall stuff is happening. Like right now, I'm working on an adult psychological horror, and like what I'm mostly thinking about with that one is themes of fatherhood, identity, and toxic romantic relationships.
I'm there.
And
Oh, sorry.
And so when I'm thinking about, so I start with the concept and the
Yeah.
theme, and I think about the story I want to tell, and then I'm like, okay, this is horror, so how nasty can I make this?
Yeah. And I feel like thinking of what Terry just talked about, thinking about how old is your protagonist? Because that's the thing, thinking about that. But also like, what do you want to do in the story, and how can horror or fantasy answer those questions, right? And so when you're writing across genres and across age groups, like all of us are doing, those are the kind of things you think about first. So who's your character? What age? Where they are in their life? Because that leads to how that story is told. And like, what are the big questions? And how can fantasy respond to that question, or how can horror? In some ways, it needs both. Because again, dark fantasy, there's a lot of horror elements and a lot of fantasy that we consume. And so in many ways, it's like, how can those specific world-building techniques help the protagonist to get to the end, to survive to the end, or to battle whatever the demons are that they're fighting?
Yeah. The only thing I would add is I write a lot of nonfiction, and sometimes I'm asking myself, how close do I want to be to the work? I've been working on a fantasy, YA fantasy for the last 2025 is going to be 10 years, girl.
Seriously.
But we're not going to talk about that. But I think fantasy is very complicated because the world building and magical systems really need to make sense for the reader. I think with horror, you could have it in more of a fantastical setting, or it could be in a contemporary setting like mine. And so there are different things you can play with. But for me, it's always the character. The character comes first. And I'm like, all right, where you want to be? You want to be over here? You want to do this? Do I actually have something that personal that has happened to me that I should just write a nonfiction piece about? So it's really figuring out that. But as you're writing, you'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last question.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for this. This has been amazing. I've really enjoyed listening to you. So I know this is a YA-specific group, but some of you have, maybe all of you have written for adults as well. And so I know this probably kind of goes into what her question was, but how do you write differently for adults rather than for kids or for teens?
I think that's a really good question. For me, when I'm writing for teens, the topics and themes don't change, but it's how is the character going to approach it, and who are the adults that are in the room, right? How much of the adults do I want them in this book? If I feel like there are more adults that need to be speaking and having a conversation, then to me that's more adult. It's an adult book with some young people in there. And there have been lots of people who have written books that they're like, oh, the protagonist was 16, but this is an adult book. And I'm like, but the adults are talking more, they're doing more, they're playing a larger role. So that's how I figure out if I'm writing for adults or teens. Middle grade for me, I've tried a couple things and I'm just like, I can't nail that middle grade voice. It's either younger or it goes back up to teen. So I'm still figuring that one out, but I'll let them answer.
Yeah, so similar to you, Cericia, the themes don't really change for me when I'm writing young adult, just more so how the character deals with it and how much power they have. Because that tends to be a lot of struggle, that tends to be a big part of the struggle for teen characters is their powerlessness and their lack of autonomy that comes from being a kid in a world that oppresses children. But as an adult, you're empowered, but you're powerless from the standpoint of systemic issues as well as your own trauma. Because the older you get, the more trauma you get, surprise. And it hinders you and stops you from doing things. And it's how do you process that to get to whatever the end goal is of the story?
Yes.
Oh, we got to wrap it up. All right. Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you all for coming. Our authors.